Jake, if you had to introduce Bob, how would you do that?
Bob. Okay, well, I usually start by saying this is my grandfather.
Graham.
Yeah, Graham. Yeah, I don't know. This is my grandfather. Been working with him now for 5 years, but I spent a lot of time with him. Growing up, had his house over on Mecklenburg, and I think it's the time I'd actually spent with him that grew my interest in architecture, and has ultimately resulted in me being where I'm at now. I certainly didn't expect even 6 years ago to be in real estate, let alone in St. John, but that's where I'm at. So he's been a huge positive influence and inspiration in my life. So, and couldn't get a better mentor, to say the least.
No question. I know a lot of people feel that way about Bob. Tell me, you said you never could have pictured yourself in real estate a few years ago. Probably never pictured yourself literally living in St. John, but here you are, not just living here, really embracing this community and ingratiating yourself to it. So, where was your head a couple years ago? And tell us about that journey to get here.
Yeah, so I took business at St. Mary's, and from there I wasn't sure where I was going to land. I ended up getting a job with IBM, working 9 to 5 in cubicle hell. I hated that. My parents knew I hated that, and I think my grandfather knew I hated that. So, one day, my father sat me down. He said, there's this opportunity that your grandfather's kind of mentioned. You could go to St. John, work with him in real estate, and eventually take over the business. I thought that was a fantastic opportunity. Not just because I'd be able to work in real estate, but to be able to work with my grandfather is a great experience and not something a lot of people get. But also to get to do real estate in a city with homes as interesting as this one is fantastic. Because I don't think I could do it in the suburbs day in and day out. It would be just as bad as working in cubicle hell, I think.
So, we're sitting in an historic home on King Street East in Uptown St. John. It's these types of places that get your blood going.
Oh, totally, yeah.
So what did you think of the real estate game beforehand, and what do you think it now? What do you think of it now? Anything that has just sort of completely re-engineered your thought process on what it's like to be in real estate?
Any opinions I had on it were from an outsider's perspective. Being in the industry now, the way I think of it's certainly different. I looked at it, prior to being in real estate, strictly from, a potential investor's perspective. So, it was interesting, but, there wasn't that much to it from my perspective. It seemed like a pretty easy gig.
Yeah.
But, being on this side of things, I've realized it's far more dynamic than one would think from an outsider's perspective. Certainly far more interesting, which, I'm glad that to be the case, because, I didn't want to get into another boring job, which it certainly hasn't been.
Yeah. So, you've not only jumped in as a realtor, you've jumped in as a real estate investor, as a developer. I know you're starting your own you're starting your own Airbnb business here in town. Where are you going to take all this?
I don't know. I'd certainly like to expand from there. We just bought our first place. It's almost a year ago today. Well, not today, but almost a year. November 14th of last year, we closed on our first place, which is a duplex. So the plan will be to put another unit in the basement, leverage that, and then hopefully pick up some more interesting properties. Ideally we'd be able to pick something out that's got good bones, but needs a bit of work, and we're able to restore it back to its former glory. Kind of.
But you're already trying to maximize the space in the building you bought. You're working on the basement.
Yeah, exactly. So the next step was, because we just opened the Airbnb, as you had mentioned, and that occupies the main floor. So we'll be converting the basement into a bachelor suite, which is actually the existing, servants' quarters, is what you call it. So I'm going to embrace a lot of the architectural elements that are still down there, and then that'll be either another Airbnb or a long-term rental.
So lots of family businesses are, mother-daughter, mother-son, father-son, father-daughter. For it to skip a generation, for it to be grandfather direct to grandson, what's that like? Do people ask you about it, or do people?
Well, most people
are
think
they
he's
interested?
my father, which I think it's a compliment.
Compliment to all of
That's
us.
right, a young-looking guy over here.
I did not think that.
No. But yeah, it's great. I know it's not as common to see grandfather grandson teamed up, but it's worked out really well. I think it's worked out better than a lot of people thought it would. Oftentimes, You know, family businesses crash and burn pretty fast, but
Expectations in the family were low.
yeah, I don't
No,
know why.
okay.
You know?
Now, was there some skepticism? Tell me.
About family expectations?
Yeah.
Well, I'm a bit of a hard ass, and so, they're all waiting to see if we'll get past 30 or 90 days, and we did. And here we are 5 years later, and like there's no bigger joy or pleasure or honor, I think, for anybody who has a grandchild, has grandchildren, to end up having a successful partnership in business with your grandson. It's a remarkable, special thing. And it's worked out really nicely for us. And, for me to be able to introduce Jake to my client base, to my market, to my friends, to my associates, to my network, and, transition the business as eventually I'll retire. I'm already, I'm over 70, but eventually I'll retire. And, for most realtors, when you retire, your business just kind of, dissipates, evaporates. People call other people, and no matter how much time you spent and how effective you've been in building a real solid brand based on, service and, facts and all the good things that we bring to the table. But when most realtors retire, it just goes poof. So, the whole game plan here has been to, partner, transition, and that's a real, at the end of your run, that's an incredible thing to be able to do.
The handover is one thing, but even with that, business has kind of flourished with the two of you. Tell me how it's affected business in the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, Jake and I are 40 years apart in age. We don't really feel that on a daily basis, I don't think. We interact, we have great respect for one another. I learn from him as much as I think he learns from me. But, your presence in the business has, expanded our demographic base. He, as much as, he's getting to know, my long-term clients, he's also bringing clients to our business that I never would have brought to. So, in terms of the long-term success of his business, once I step away, it's already, you can already see how it's taking root and how that's going to grow.
Tell me about Jake. Tell me what kind of guy he is. Tell me, introduce him to me.
Well, Jake is my oldest grandson. He's the oldest boy of the oldest boy, the first son of the first son. And so there's something about that. But, Jake is a really likable, really bright, really engaging, outgoing guy. And I haven't introduced him to anybody who hasn't said, what a great guy he is, So, everybody, we all talk about the Gicker, my dad, his great-grandfather, and everybody said, you said, what a great guy the Gicker was. Well, what a great guy Jake McVicar is. And so, it's been a pleasure to work together. We've gained so much from one another. We enjoy the time we spend. We talk about a lot of things in terms of the business. Jake has his business degree. He didn't just go to St. Mary's. He graduated from St. Mary's. He worked for IBM for a while, as he said. He also worked for the TD Bank for a while. So, he took the time once he succeeded in university, he took the time to work for a couple of corps, public corps, big corps, and there's a lot that you learn when you're starting your career, when you work for, when you take that approach to your transition. And you gain a lot, and you don't really always understand it up front, but over time you say, gee, I'm glad I did that. So all of that, but Jake and I, the earliest thing that I remember about Jake that sort of is relevant to what we're doing together now, he came one summer and spent a week or two, I think he might have been 8 or 9. And by then I was just a year or two in the business. And so one day I said, hey, Jake, you want to come with me? So, yeah, of course. So we hop in the car, and a buddy of mine, Jim Bazanza, was in the middle of a big knock 'em down, pull it apart renovation over here on Princess Street, just a block from the house you just bought, where you live. Yeah. And we went in there, and all the crew is in there, and they're doing all their thing, and the place is stripped down to the bone. And Jake was just he was fascinated. He was just so interested in what was going on. And I think that was the first time you really got, you got your boots into a place like that. And I think from that point forward, that was when when he realized, and I realized, that he had a real interest in architecture. And we're realtors, but a whole lot about what we do and the value we add, is an interface with architecture, and sometimes when we're lucky, architects, and you have a real sense of that. And I believe at one point you considered actually being an architect.
I did.
You did, and so had I in high school, interestingly enough. So we have a lot in common, and I see a lot of him and me, and vice versa, and it's just. It's just a joy to be able to work together.
Well, it's so amazing to hear. I mean, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, I suppose. It's really interesting to hear that it's, it's in the DNA. I don't know if people tell you this or not, but you look like you're related, like you look like family. So to hear that you have the same instincts and talents and likes and dislikes is very cool. What does it feel like to hear those nice things from your grandfather?
Oh, it means the world to me, honestly. Yeah, it's
and you've heard them before.
It's not the first time I've heard them, but every time it truly does mean the world to me. I think so very highly of my grandfather, so to hear that from him means a lot.
And now we will sing Kumbaya.
That's right.
Jake, you are investing and helping build the next chapter of this business that your grandfather started. Tell me, what's it like, working with somebody who, grandfather aside, is a bit of a personality around town. There's not too many people that he doesn't know, whether you go down Waterloo Street or whether you go up to Mount Pleasant. Bob has friends all over this community. Everybody knows Bob. Bob's never been shy, always opinionated, very active in the community, very out there, but will always talk to people and share his opinion. He's not a shrinking violet at all. So what's it like to work with somebody who's kind of bigger than life in this town?
Oh, I mean, it's a cool experience. I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm walking around with a celebrity, perhaps a local celebrity. But no, it's. He knows a lot of very interesting people in the city. A lot of people have, influenced. A lot of people that have done, some interesting things, here locally. So to have the opportunity to, hang out with these people, people like yourself, even, and kind of hear their end of things is interesting. And, I see that as a great opportunity, and one in which I'm grateful for, of course.
Tell me what you think about St. John right now, where we're going, what's going on, the energy. What's the future look like for St. John and for real estate and you in it?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think St. John's headed the right direction. Without question, there's a lot of investment uptown. Just with current developments, you got 99 King, Fundy Key, but there's a lot of economic development as well. You've got the port, the new industrial site. So I think in the next 5 years or so, this the city will be completely different to what it is right now in a positive way. I think contrary to what a lot of people think, St. John is a great city. I think for a lot of people, they've kind of held on to the old reputation that it had. It's not smelly. It's not scary. It's actually a really interesting city. And it's cool to, at least in Atlantic Canada, to experience a city that has a heritage core intact like this one. Like, you don't see it anywhere else. I was just reading an article this morning where they're tearing more heritage down in Halifax. So, the charm it did have with regards to heritage is, disappearing. Whereas St. John still has a lot of that. And to me, that's what makes it an interesting place. So I think that's, an added bonus.
So that's your take on business, energy, and such. What's it like to live here as a 29-year-old guy? You came from Halifax. Not a lot of people come from Halifax. We'd love to have more people come from Halifax. What do you tell them all?
Came from the big city.
Yeah.
Well, I've recruited a couple of people so far. So
tell me about that.
Yeah, I got. I think it was only my second year here.
And you sold them houses.
I did. Perhaps that's the main motivator. No. So my buddy came up from Halifax to, it was actually during the Moonlight Bazaar weekend, so it's a perfect weekend to showcase the city. But he hung out here. He at that time been looking for homes in Halifax for a bit, and as you might know, prices there are just bananas. So he kind of mulled the idea around of moving to St. John. His fiance was on board, and so we started looking, and they realized pretty quickly that they could get a lot more for a lot less here. And so within a year or so, he had bought a place, moved here, and he's been enjoying it. I mean, I'd certainly, to your earlier point, coming from Halifax to St. John, it's certainly a smaller city. But I think that's what I like so much about it. I'm able to live right uptown, affordable, especially compared to Halifax. I've got everything I need in short walking distance, and it's just, as I mentioned, earlier as well, it's a more interesting city to me. It's got that charm that a lot don't have anymore.
And you two predominantly, you've got listings all over the community, but predominantly you're really, really known for the South End and heritage architecture. Tell me about some of the amazing places you've seen. Tell me about the place we're in right now.
Yeah, well, this is, I mean, the kind of the pinnacle, I think, of what we've done thus far. This is a hard one to top. Built in 1885 by the Peters family. It's actually the son of the guy that built the synagogue house, because that was a single family home originally. But this home of this size to have this level of grandeur is unusual, and then for it to still be intact as it is right now is even more unusual. I mean, it is easily one of the most ornate homes I've ever seen. I don't know if you feel the same way. And it's not too big. A lot of these older homes, they're massive. 4 or 5 bedrooms, more than most families, modern families certainly need. But this one was built, originally as a 3-bedroom, and that holds well today, which I think is, one of its big attributes.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's an absolutely amazing space. Bob, where do you think, as somebody who was also, somebody who came from Nova Scotia 30 years ago, was it what year? 92?
35 years ago in
91.
from downtown Toronto.
I don't even think of you as anything other than a St. Johner, and I know most people don't. Where's the city come from, and where are we going?
Well, this is an authentic city. And, what really appeals to people, from my perspective and what I've heard over the past 30 years, is this is a gritty, neighborly, friendly, welcoming, diverse, full spectrum city. And this neighborhood that, we've built a real estate business around, is all of those things. And too many cities, from my own perspective, and I lived in 13 different cities before I landed here, so I moved around a lot, and I've traveled this country from coast to coast. During the 80s, during the prime time of my retail career, we built a national chain of specialty stores, coast to coast, 300 stores. And so at the time, I used to say, I knew the country better than the Prime Minister did then, because I was the guy that was going to every place you can imagine. You name it, I've been there. Where's the mall? Where's the downtown? What's the scope of things here? So St. John, to me, when it came time for me to leave Toronto and come back east, because we grew up in Nova Scotia, St. John was an easy choice for me. I mean, I'd been in and out of here a lot of times, and I could never get it out of my head. The first time I walked down Canterbury Street one foggy July night in 1983, I never forgot that night. And Canterbury Street looked a lot different then than it does now. But all I could see was the potential in it, this incredible architecture and this incredible cityscape. And so it's just amazing. So when I get a chance to come here in 91, it was really, I was really enthusiastic about that. I'm still really enthusiastic about that.
Having, been here, for a while, contributing to this, if you put yourself in the position of that younger man in 1983, how do you feel now? Have we lived up to it? And what more do we need to do?
I've never had a second of regret about coming here. I'm just as keen to be here today as the day I arrived, and it's true. And we talk about the authenticity of this city, based on its grittiness, based on its intact original downtown core that feels like a people-based place, not a car-based place. So that's really important. But the other thing that makes it authentic to me is the very fact that this city, it has real economy. We make things here, we produce things here, we export things from here, we import, add value, and export them from here. This city's economy is based on real economy. The real. It's not a government town. It's not a military town. It's not really a university town. Although we're happy to have a university. It's a real economic town. And to have to be able to live in an authentic place and invest your future, invest his future, knowing that we have these substantial industrial and other operations that are locally owned by a local family who we all know, who we still see on the street, who are kind and friendly and generous people, who are fully vested. I mean, what would give anybody more confidence in their choice about where to live than the very fact that this place is driven by real economy, by people who live here, who own it, and who we see out and about. So that's an amazing combination that I don't know exists anywhere else in Canada.
If you had a time machine, stepped into it in 1983 and stepped out this past summer, which I think is part of, we're in a transformational period, I feel, in St. John. The amount of quality building that's going on, the transformation on the waterfront, as somebody who's lived in Uptown and enjoyed the waterfront almost daily for 25, 30 years. It's remarkable. They took something that was a jewel and they added more jewels to it. The activity at the port, just the visual nature of our Uptown with these beautiful working cranes, these multicolored ships and containers, it really is something spectacular. Would it just blow your mind? In 1983 to today.
Well, I had great aspirations for this place when I got here. And, and I was an early, advocate of this place and what it could and should be. I was lucky enough right from the get-go to make some friends with some people who were on the same page as I was in terms of what I thought the potential of this place was. People like Steve Carson and others. So, is it as good as it could have been, from my perspective then to now? I think it's exceeded my expectations, honestly. And the reinvestment just in this neighborhood, where the majority of where the focus of our real estate business is, the reinvestment on any given day, in any given month, in any given summer. I mean, private reinvestment, municipal reinvestment, federal reinvestment, the rebuilding of streets and sewer systems and water delivery systems, domestic water delivery systems. To replace streets and infrastructure that were 100 and 130 and 140 years old. This has been going on for more than a decade. So this speaks to renewal, and this keeps to reinvigoration. But at the same time, we've managed to keep what we have, in an authentic way. We haven't changed the face of it. What differentiates it from every other place that looks just like every other place. This place looks like St. John, New Brunswick. You talk to cruise ship passengers who come here every year, hundreds of thousands of them, and they will tell you there's no other place where they get to take a 6,000 person cruise ship and park it on a dock and step off, and they're right there where the restaurants and the galleries and the shops are. So this is an amazing thing about this city. And at the same time, we've got, in this particular moment in time, JDI, Irving Company, is literally rebuilding their operations at Reversing Falls, as though from new, replacing 100-year-old, 60-year-old infrastructure. The Irving Oil family, the IOL operation, new headquarters on Queen Square, top notch. Architecturally, we talk about architecture a lot. Architecturally spectacular. The fact that we have the largest oil refinery in Canada in a place where there's no oil.
Right.
And we export 90% of it to the U.S. So what does that do in terms of value add economically? So when you put all this in context, what we do daily, which is represent people in the sale and purchase of real estate, we can do that with great confidence. And a good portion of our business are people that are coming here from other places. So we feel well equipped to be able to do that. We're confident. We're not struggling to make the case. The case is easily made in St. John, New Brunswick, as a place to live and invest.
Given all the energy that's going on in St. John, all the building, all the newness added to our vintage heritage stock, how do you feel? And what are your aspirations for the future, for this community?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very optimistic about St. John. And I think my grandfather said it really well, and I'm not sure I can add much to that, but truly it's coming here, and there was part of me that was unsure whether or not I wanted to stay here, invest here, grow a family here. But that's changed entirely since I moved here in, was it March of 21 or so?
We're still in COVID.
We're still in COVID. I had to isolate for 2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. But no, I feel very positively about the city. It's headed the right direction. And I mean, this is a place I can see myself, living in long term, growing a family in. It's a place I really enjoy being.
Here we are embarking upon a podcast. I'm looking at a couple of realtors who, obviously are sponsoring this podcast, and there's some value there. But you guys have also said that this is about more than realty. And more than just merchandising your inventory. It is about really getting into the community. It is all about the neighborhood. So you're going to get into opportunities, issues, personalities. I look forward to some of the more vigorous debates that you're going to have with people. How does this all make you feel embarking upon your first podcast?
It's fantastic. I am excited. First podcast ever, so kind of see how it all plays out. But it's exciting for me because it's a good opportunity to discuss and showcase not just our business as you mentioned, but really we're here to showcase the city and how interesting it is and what it has to offer. So I mean, this is the perfect opportunity to do that. As I mentioned earlier, there's still a lot of misconceptions about it. So I'm hoping through the series of podcasts we're able to address those things and show people that those concerns really don't exist anymore, and that it is a great place to live and work.
Same question, Bob. How do you feel? You're not shy. You've always engaged with media over the years. You have been active in community activity. How does it feel actually, just unfiltered, taking your thoughts to a podcast?
Well, it's kind of a next step for us, and this is the way the world's going in terms of communication. There's this thirst for local content. As much as people can access whatever is going on in the world at any moment if they want to, there's this growing unsatisfied desire that people have, the public has, for local content. So, I see that, what Jake and I do as realtors is we're advisors, we're community builders. What we do is, all the things we do have a much broader scope than what Jake says he's thought of when he first thought about real estate from the outside. So as advisors, a lot of what we do is data based, it's community based, it's marketing based, it's negotiation based. There's this whole broad scale of skills and duties that we have to our clients that I think in a podcast we can showcase, flesh them out, talk about them in greater detail, and put it out there so people can see how focused we are on helping people achieve objectives, whether it's residential, finding a house, selling a house, a business. My next meeting this morning is to go and help a guy who wants to open a restaurant deal with his first landlord issues. So we do small business things, we do commercial things. And so this podcast, I think, will help us connect with the public and show in a broader way all the things that we do and help people fully understand the opportunities.
Well, personally, as somebody from the community, I think we're lucky to have you both. And I'm not just talking about what you do every day for work. I just think as a couple of really, really motivated individuals, this community should be thankful to have you. And my final question is, are we going for coffee or beer?
I vote beer.
It's not noon yet, is it?
Nobody knows. Nobody knows.
There's no timestamp on these videos.
Any final thoughts before we wrap?
Never take the bait on that question.
Well, this is good for one-liners. Any sage advice?
There you have one.
Words to live by, Mr. McVicar?
Well, I always say persevere, don't give up. You know, promise is a promise and a deal's a deal.
What's on your wall?
Niba story, carbon under.
And that's,
Don't let the bastards get you down.
Here, here. On that, we'll end.
Perfect.
Join us regularly as we talk about real estate, the neighborhood, and what's going on in our community.